as well. There's quite a few of you in the group today, which is fantastic to see. Every webinar we've done so far has had an awful lot of attendees, which is really, really great for us and great for me, because it means I know that I'm not just talking to a blank screen from the UK here, which is quite reassuring for me as a Prezi designer. So what we're going to talk about today is something that I think is probably the most important thing when it comes to any new Prezi user really being able to consider themselves or call themselves a Prezi expert, and that's how to avoid death by Prezi. So I'm going to talk about what that really means in just a second and show you an example of death by Prezi as well. I know that people are joining us from all around the world, so thank you very much. Whatever time of day it is there, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. It's around 4 o'clock here in the UK right now, and I know for our US listeners, I think it's about 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I hope everyone is well and looking forward to listening in on the webinar. If you do want to interact, I'll tell you how to do that in just a second, but probably the best way to interact is via Twitter. So you can follow myself on Twitter. The details of that are just at the bottom of your screen or bottom of my presentation right now. That's at the presenter. And just use the hashtag Prezi Webinar so that everyone can follow the conversation. I've tried to do this with the last couple of sessions we've run. Not had too much interaction online, but quite a few of you choosing to email instead. The benefit, of course, of using Twitter is that everyone can see that conversation, and hopefully everyone then will gain from your questions and me answering those questions as well. So please do try to use that if you can. So I just want to set the scene for this afternoon. We are going to run this session for about 45 minutes or so. 30 minutes of that, or maybe a little bit less, will probably be me just presenting to you about how to avoid death by Prezi. Then we will leave around about 10 to 15 minutes of question time. That's your opportunity for you to ask me anything at all about the content you've just seen, or anything related to Prezi at all, for that matter. If there's anything we don't have time for, then I will either write a blog post to answer that, or try to answer it to you personally in an email or something. You can interact with us as well using the chat box on the right-hand side of your screens. That will either be above or below the audio details in your GoToWebinar menu box. And also the session is going to be recorded. So we will make sure that that recording is available. We will post that online to YouTube and email all of you the link to that. And of course we'll be tweeting about it as well. So again, those Twitter details, you can follow myself at the presenter. Also include Prezi in the conversation as well, just at Prezi, and use the hashtag Prezi Webinar. Okay, so that's how the session looks. Let's actually go into talking about death by Prezi and what it's all about. So I want to kind of set the scene here, and I gave this presentation a little while ago, but I still really enjoy delivering this presentation today, and I want to give you a bit of a flight safety briefing. I'm going to theme my presentation as that of a flight safety briefing, and I want to just pretend that I'm your pilot for the next 30 minutes and you guys are actually my passengers. So welcome aboard. I was going to say the presenter airways then or something like that, but without getting too cheesy, let's just take a look at our first bit of information. So the first thing I want to do is give you an example of what death by Prezi really is. So any new users to Prezi will very quickly realize that actually Prezi is very, very different to PowerPoint. And with Prezi, you can move your audience in any direction at all. You can move them across the screen to the left, you can move them across the screen to the right and come back out. You can focus in on details and zoom all the way into those details as far as you want to and zoom back out. And of course, you can rotate your canvas in any direction, clockwise or anti-clockwise. And there is no limit to this as well. And for a lot of new Prezi users, they get very excited by this and they think that that's what Prezi is all about. And then they wonder why their audiences start to look away from their presentation screen about 5 or 10 minutes or so into their actual presentation. And I'm just going to do this for a little bit more because I have seen Prezis that actually rotate and zoom in and do all of this crazy movement for about 20 minutes or so on the screen, sometimes even longer. And hopefully if you're looking at your screens right now, you may be starting to feel a little bit nauseous. I say hopefully. I don't mean that I actually want you guys to throw up, but I do want you to understand that that's what this could lead to. Now there hasn't been any reports of any audience member physically throwing up after viewing a Death by Prezi presentation, but there have been lots and lots of reports of people having to look away from the screens and actually in some cases having to get up and walk out of the room that they were being presented in, and you know, that's pretty common right now. A lot of the time I come across people who say, yes, I saw Prezi, it made me feel so sick that I've decided I'm going to stick with PowerPoint. So let's make sure that whatever we do when we work with Prezi, we actually don't make people feel nauseous, and hopefully you won't go to the extent of making people physically sick. Now, if you feel like that's something you are doing at the moment, then don't panic because you're not alone. There are millions of people out there right now who are building Death by Prezi presentations. The briefing I'm about to give you is going to help you completely avoid that in the future. Okay, so I want to talk about first of all why this happens and why people don't actually think a little bit more about what they're doing with Prezi itself. So let's take a look at pilots. We'll use that example first of all just to keep that theme going. So, you know, any pilot who flies a commercial airline right now, or maybe a small chartered aircraft, they would have grown up probably dreaming of flying a plane at some stage, and they would have really focused in on that dream for a long, long time to make it a reality. And when they were in that very young stage of, you know, being a boy or a girl and growing up and having that dream, they would have probably thought that flying a plane was the most exciting thing they could do, and maybe they had dreams of flying it upside down, you know, doing loop-the-loops and all sorts of crazy things with that aircraft, and that would have been their dream, you know, flying a plane and being excited every day about doing it. But actually, in reality, flying a plane is probably quite a dull profession. Unless you are a stunt pilot, flying a plane, you know, has to have lots of planning. It has to have lots of consideration for its passengers, because without that, you end up with something like this. So I think you kind of get the idea there. That was my dramatic pause so that you can really get the message that I'm trying to get across here. We have to make sure that we take and we consider our audience members at all times. And the people who don't are the people who at the moment are creating lots and lots of Death by Prezi presentations, and you know, that's why their audience members are falling out of their seats and really feeling that motion sickness. So if that is you, then of course you have to face the consequences. You for a start, if we cause injury to people on our flights, then they may end up suing us for that injury. People are definitely going to feel very, very sick, and that will lead to a bad, or a negative experience. And we don't want any of our presentations to be a negative experience for anyone at all. Prezi should be a really innovative way of presenting, and it should help you engage your audience a lot more, and it should be a lot more fun. There is no Prezi presentation that should ever be negative, but unfortunately, because of Death by Prezi, there are quite a few out there right now. So the danger of that, of course, is that no one's ever going to want to fly with Prezi Airways ever again if they see a really bad Death by Prezi presentation. And we need to make sure that that doesn't happen, because, if people see a bad Prezi, they're just going to run all the way back to the really old-fashioned ways of presenting. And I don't want to name names about any particular piece of software, but hopefully from what you see on the screen right now, you get the idea of what I'm getting at. Okay, so there are some presentation software out there at the moment that most people are used to using, and I come across a lot of people nowadays who say, I've seen Prezi, I was very excited by what it could do, but it made me feel so sick, I decided I'm going to go back to that old slide-by-slide way of presenting. And again, I won't mention any names, but you get the idea on that. So we have to face the consequences if we're going to do that, and we have to make sure that as Prezi users, we don't let this happen. And not just as Prezi users, as presenters, we need to make sure that no one ever has a negative experience when they see any of our presentations. And even if Prezi didn't exist right now, and I was teaching you some other kind of presentation software, I'd still be saying exactly the same thing. You have to make sure that your presentations are fun, that they're engaging, that they're memorable, and that they're a positive experience. There are far too many people who sit through hours and hours of presentations each week that they would quite happily forget, and most of them do forget very, very quickly. So let's make sure that doesn't happen if you're one of the 50 million people right now that are really, really starting to adopt Prezi and really trying to get the most out of it. So I suppose that leads us to the question, so how do we avoid it? We know what it is now, but what can we actually do to make sure that every Prezi presentation we build always avoids Death by Prezi? Well, any of you who are already using the Prezi software will know that there is nothing in the software itself that forces you to avoid Death by Prezi. It's actually very, very easy to create Death by Prezi by just opening up the software and throwing all of your content on the screen. So let me show you my approach to avoiding Death by Prezi. And this is, of course, the most important part of this in-flight safety briefing that I'm giving you. So I'm going to take you through a few really simple steps to avoiding Death by Prezi, and I hope that by the end of this you'll really understand what all of you should be doing before you go anywhere near the Prezi software. So the very first thing is, again, if we take a look at our pilots and even our co-pilots, and let's say instead of pilot it's the presenter and maybe the presentation designer who are working together on this, you would never ever get a pilot step foot into their plane on the day of the flight and actually look at their co-pilot and say, where are we going today? And in return, the co-pilot would never look back at them and say, I have no idea, I thought you knew. Okay, that would never happen, or at least I hope it doesn't happen, especially for some of the flights I've been on. So, you would never ever have that lack of information from someone who's flying a plane and their co-pilot. But unfortunately it does happen quite a lot with presentations. A lot of presenters don't really know what the point of their presentation is, and if they don't know, the people actually designing the presentation, so the co-pilot, isn't really going to be able to help them get to their destination. So that's really the point I'm trying to make first of all, is what is your destination? And I suppose in terms of a presentation, maybe destination is the wrong word, but we can replace that with the word objective. So what is the objective of your presentation? And this is something that a lot of presenters never even consider when they start putting together their presentations. So the very first thing that I was thinking of when I put together this particular Prezi a while back was, number one, I need to give my audience a demo of what Death by Prezi is and how it would look. That was one of my objectives for this presentation. The second objective was I need to help my audience realize why Death by Prezi happens. So why is there so much of it around right now, and maybe why are people, and even people in my audience, why are they creating Death by Prezi so easily and finding it hard to avoid? The third objective for this presentation was to explain how to plan a Prezi in the right way so that you can avoid Death by Prezi. So before I went anywhere near the Prezi software, I grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, and I thought about what my objectives would be. And those are the three main objectives of this presentation. And I was really, really clear about that goal before I did anything else. So if that's something that you don't do right now, even if you're not a Prezi user just yet, maybe you're still thinking about whether Prezi is the right tool for you, and maybe you do still use PowerPoint or Keynote, you should still be thinking about your objectives. It really doesn't matter what system you're using to create your presentation visuals. We should all, as presenters, be thinking about what our objectives is. And really that comes down to another thing as well, and that's thinking about why your audience should care about your presentation. So I read a really good book recently about the presentation tips from Steve Jobs, and one of the things that he would always consider in his presentations is, why should my audience care about what I'm actually going to show them? And if you can think about that and think about your objectives, the two should link very closely, but always think about those things before you start building your visuals. It's absolutely crucial. So that's my very first tip. Once you know what your objectives are, or you could have a number of objectives, you need to think about what's the quickest route to get there. So, a pilot who's flying to a destination wouldn't fly halfway around the globe to get to that destination. They would obviously look at a map, look at the airspace they have available and the flight paths that they have access to, and try and figure out the quickest route to get to their objective, to get to their final destination. And the way that you can do that with Prezi is, again, by planning and actually using a tool called mind mapping. Now, hopefully you will have all heard of mind mapping in the past. If you haven't, then I would recommend that you Google it as soon as this session is finished. And also, if you want to become really, really good at mind mapping, also Google the guy who invented mind mapping, and that's Tony Buzan. And Buzan is just spelled B-U-Z-A-N. There are tons and tons of books that Tony Buzan has written about mind mapping, and it's without a doubt the best way of planning a number of different things, but in particular the best way of planning a Prezi presentation. And the reason for that is that you're able to put your objective onto the center of your page or your piece of paper. So I still use just paper and pen for my mind mapping. Put my objectives onto the center of a page and then branch out into some key facts or key pieces of information that I want to share with my audience. I can then branch out even further to focus in on more detail, and before I know it, I've got a really clear picture in front of me on one piece of A4 paper that shows me my flight plan. It shows me the areas I need to fly my audience through in order to get to my final destination or to get to my objective. Okay, so I will show you an example of that in just a second, but really the number one rule of Prezi Flight School is that you should always know what your destination is. So figure out what your objectives are. Why should your audience care about what you're presenting to them about? and figure out what your objectives are going to be and what's the quickest way for you and for your audience to understand those points. Okay, without a doubt, that's the most important part of any presentation, regardless of the piece of software you're going to use to create the visuals with. So here's an example of a mind map that I actually put together for this particular presentation that you're viewing right now. So I think this probably took me around about 20 or 25 minutes to build. And again, I find the quickest way of mind mapping is to just grab a piece of paper and a pen and just do this, you know, in that kind of analog way. So I don't go digital at all. I like to think, you know, I do everything analog, and then I turn my objectives and everything that I can see on that mind map into a digital presentation. That's without a doubt the best way to work. So you can see there on the screen we've got lots and lots of different points, and all of the information on that mind map is mentioned and talked about in this presentation. So we've got things like motion sickness, making your passengers sick. We've got a little visual there of an aeroplane, you know, planning your journey. There's lots and lots of key bits of information on there that really helped me understand what I was going to take my audience through in order to get to my objective in the quickest possible time. Because I don't want to talk to you guys for 2, 3 hours, 4 hours, not because I don't want to, but because I know you don't have the time to sit through a 3-hour presentation to just figure out how to avoid death by Prezi. So this is the quickest way to get you there, okay? And again, that's something to think about in your presentations. People don't have a lot of time nowadays, so what's the quickest route to get to my objective? So that's a mind map. For those of you, again, who don't know what mind mapping is, if you've never come across it, I would recommend that you Google that term at the end of this session. Have a look at some books that Tony Buzan has written on the subject. I personally think mind mapping is a great way to plan anything at all. I'm a bit of a mind mapping nerd, if I'm honest with you. I use it to plan all sorts of different things in my life, but without a doubt it's the best way to plan a Prezi presentation. One of the reasons why it's a great way to plan a Prezi as well is because it helps you figure out what your big picture should be. Okay, now the big picture is a concept or a term that I use quite a lot when I'm training people in Prezi. So at the very start of this presentation, we zoomed out to see a flight safety card, and that was my big picture. So everything inside that visual holds the content for my presentation. Okay, and I was able to come up with that concept, that visual metaphor, to tie everything together nicely and give you a more meaningful presentation. I was able to come up with all of that just from spending 25 minutes or so doing that mind map on paper. Okay, I didn't just open Prezi and instantly think of that idea because I'm, you know, a creative genius or anything like this. I actually have to spend the time thinking about it and planning it, and then I do actually get these light bulb moments when all of a sudden my brain says, do you know what would be a really good visual and a really good concept for this particular Prezi? And that's how I work. And it really doesn't matter how creative you are or are not. You don't have to have a design degree or have, you know, you don't have to have gone to university and studied design by any means at all to actually come up with those really creative ideas and those visual metaphors. I promise you, I've done Prezi training for a long time now, a number of years, and I get people coming to my sessions who at the very start of the day say to me, you'll have to be patient with me, I'm not creative at all. Once they understand that mind mapping and planning their presentations is the first step, they're actually really, really surprised at the visuals and the Prezis they come up with by the end. So, if you take anything away from today, it should be that mind mapping is the first place you should always start with your Prezi designs. So like I said, this was my big picture, and I actually don't go anywhere else in my Prezi canvas apart from inside that big picture. So again, just linking this back to a flight theme, everything outside of that big picture I would consider my no-fly zone. And if I just grab my mouse a second and zoom out here, you can actually see the amount of space I could use if I really wanted to. And in Prezi, the Prezi canvas, as hopefully most of you know, the space you have available is pretty vast. There is a huge amount of space to use, and one of the biggest mistakes people make is they try to use every single inch of that space. So don't fall into that trap. Just because you have that space, it doesn't mean you have to use it. Create your big picture and then don't move outside of that space. It will help you as the presentation designer. You'll have all of your information much closer together, and also the audience will have a much better grasp of how everything links together, because they'll be able to see that in a really nice, concise, big picture visual. Okay, and of course if you go outside into your fly zone, there are some characters in there that you really need to look out for. So hopefully you can see that video pretty clearly on your screens there. That was just something I grabbed from YouTube. I always like to get a good Star Wars reference in to my presentations wherever I can. Okay, so mind mapping without a doubt is the first step to building any really successful Prezi presentation. One of the second steps, or in fact the final step to getting things right, once you have your plan in place and you've got that mind map in front of you, you should know by then what your big picture is going to be, the flow of your presentation, the content that you're going to move through, and in which order. And hopefully you'll have then gone off and actually found all of that content. Maybe you've got YouTube videos or embedded videos. You might have sound clips, JPEG images. You may even have text and things like that. All of your content you should get into place second. And then finally, you should build your Prezi. Okay, that's the final thing you should do. And in fact, one of the things that we do here when we're building Prezis for people is we tend to spend about 70% of our time, maybe even 80%, planning the Prezi, building the visuals and getting the content right, and 30% of the time or thereabouts actually building the Prezi presentation. Okay, so the more time you spend planning and getting the visuals and the content right, the easier it is at the very end stage to build your Prezi. Now, when it comes to building your Prezi, if you're anything like me, then you may be thinking about cake most of the day, and I always tell everyone that building a Prezi should be a piece of cake. So when it comes to actually putting things together, the very first thing I would add to my Prezi presentation would be my background image. So whatever that big picture visual is going to be inside your presentation, I would put that onto your Prezi canvas first. Okay, and once that's in place, you then have a really nice framework to actually go through, maybe zoom into certain areas of that big picture and actually add your content. So that's the really tasty bits, the cream and the jam of our Prezi cake. And that could be text, video, imagery, sound effects, anything at all. The very final layer to your Prezi cake is the thing that really glues it all together. And in terms of Prezi, that would be your frames and your paths. So the way that we work here at the presenter when we're building any Prezi is we get all of the content in position first, and then we actually go through the Prezi and add the flow of the presentation. And whenever I'm training people in how to use Prezi as well, of course, that's the process I get them to actually use throughout the day. If you're brand new to Prezi right now, you may be trying to do everything at once. So you might be opening Prezi, putting on content, adding a frame, adding a path point, and then moving on to the next frame, the next path point, throwing in your content there. And you might be getting a little bit stressed out because there's just an awful lot to think about when you do all of that at once. So if that does sound like you, then just take a little step back and try and separate those two things out. Concentrate first of all on a really good plan. Then from that plan, get your content in place. Then of course go into Prezi, add your content, position it correctly, then focus on the audience's journey through your presentation. And I guarantee you that you'll save a lot of time doing that, and you'll also end up with a much more effective Prezi presentation by the end of it as well. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, and that is really as simple, or I suppose I should say that's as much as I want to talk about how to avoid death by Prezi. It may not sound simple, so I don't really want to use that term. I don't want to assume that anyone is finding that really simple at all, because it is very different to anything you might be used to with PowerPoint design or Keynote design or anything like that. But again, if you're using any other tool apart from Prezi, I would still approach a presentation design in that exact same way. Even if Prezi didn't exist and I was teaching people how to get the most out of PowerPoint, I would still be teaching that same kind of process. Okay, so just to recap on those points there, always plan your Prezis. No matter how much time you have, there is always time to plan a presentation. Even if you only have an hour, 10 minutes or 15 minutes of planning will save you time in the long run, and it will mean that you end up with a much better result at the end of those 60 minutes. Okay? Also, know where you're going. You have to know what your objective is. If you don't, then you're probably going to spend a lot of time showing your audience stuff that they just don't care about. Okay, so that's one thing you don't want to do, because they will switch off immediately. And I think that's where a lot of presenters go wrong, and that's why we see a lot of people in our audiences, answering emails on their BlackBerries under the desk and things like that, because we haven't really taken the time to fully understand what it is they care about and what we should really be talking about right from the get-go. Also, make sure you give your passengers a smooth flight. Prezi is not all about zooming in and zooming out and rotating the canvas around just because you can. You should only use those kind of effects to create emphasis or to focus in on certain details of your presentation, and then to zoom back out to show your audience how everything links together. Anyone who says, oh, the reason I use Prezi is because I can spin things around and zoom in and zoom out, they've got it very wrong. That's not why you should use Prezi. That's a nice feature of Prezi, and it helps your audience understand and remember more if it's used in the right way. Okay, so make sure you give people a really smooth flight, and use that big picture technique as much as you can, and that's something we're going to talk about in our next webinar as well. Also, beware of the no-fly zone. There are some dangerous characters out there, as you saw a second ago, but try not to use all of the space available to you in Prezi. And again, Prezi doesn't stop you doing that. There is no limit to where you can move to, but as a presentation designer, you want to make your life as easy as possible. So creating a big picture and not going outside of that visual will actually enable you to keep your content much closer together. It will become much more manageable, and also you're going to give your audience a much smoother flight because of that. So I just want to leave a little bit of time for questions now. I'm not sure if any questions have come into the chat box at all. I haven't seen any on there, so I'm hoping that's just because you were all glued to the screen watching that presentation. So I'm just going to pause myself for a second, and that's a chance for me to grab a bit of water here as well. Just have a think about if there's anything from that presentation that maybe doesn't make sense, or maybe you would like me to recap on, or anything that you'd like to ask at all. Drop that into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screens, and I will answer those in the next few minutes. So I'm just going to pause myself for about 30 seconds or so, and hopefully we'll have some questions to answer when I come back. Hi again, guys. So that was quite a good idea for me to pause there and give you a chance to ask me some questions. And there's some really good ones that have come through. So I'm going to try and answer as many of those as I can over the next 10 or 15 minutes or so. I'm in no rush to get anywhere anyway because it's the end of a very long week for me of Prezi training. So I will answer as many as I can and maybe even stick around for a little bit longer on this session as well. So the very first thing that came into the chat box was a hello from an old friend of mine, Lorraine. So Lorraine, hello. I am very well, thank you. Very nice to see you on the sessions. Let me know how you're getting on with Prezi, because I know that you were really keen on Prezi when we worked together a little while ago, so that's great. Another question that I want to answer first of all was someone asked a second ago if I have any examples of how to use the zooming tool to create emphasis. And you may have seen on the screen here that I was clicking around in my Prezi software, just opening a completely different presentation. And the reason for that is because, yes, I do have a really good example of how you can use Prezi to create emphasis. So this is our Prezi training presentation that we use when we're out on site or doing online training with our customers, and this is the example that I use. So I'm just going to show everyone this really quickly. Now, what you can see on the screen at the moment is a really simple bar chart, and this is the type of thing that I see in PowerPoint presentations, you know, all week long that gets sent in to us. And sometimes I see PowerPoint slides that have about 4 or 5 charts like this on one slide, which means, of course, none of your audience can read any of the text that's on there. They don't understand what they're looking at all, and it's just completely pointless visual. Now, the beauty with Prezi, of course, is that we can take quite a dry piece of information like this, and we can take our audience into that information. We can actually zoom in on a certain row and a certain column and give them more information when they get there. So I've got a really cheesy image that I grabbed from Google and some text, but you could have a video clip, you could have another chart there if you really wanted to. And then when we're done talking about that row and that column, we can come all the way back out to what we would call our big picture. We can then click and zoom all the way back in again to the next row and the next column, talk about that, and then come back out. So this is how you should use Prezi's zooming in and zooming out feature. You know, I'm using it for a really good reason. I'm zooming in so that I can remove all of that visual distraction and allow my audience's eyes and ears, and more importantly their brains, to focus in on the details. You know, let's really allow them to focus in on that detail, and then let's come all the way back out to remind them of what it is we're talking about, and also remind them of how everything links together. And this is the science behind Prezi as well. If anyone says to you, why should I use Prezi, your answer should be because if you use it well, you can actually help people remember more about what they're seeing. And you can do that by using this simple technique. This is the big picture technique again, just with a really dry piece of information this time. So, you know, what I was doing with that flight safety information just a second ago was exactly the same thing that I'm doing with this chart. There's no difference between the two. I'm just using different visuals. So hopefully that answers your question there, and hopefully that's something that everyone finds really useful. So, you know, lots of people say to me all the time, I've seen Prezi, why should I use it? I always say, because you can help people remember more of what you're showing them in your presentation. And that's how you do it. The human brain works to take in information and connect it or relate it to other information that's stored in our brains. And if we can make enough of those connections, we actually remember, you know, processes, ideas, concepts, whatever it is we've been shown. We can remember it a lot easier if we can make enough of those connections. That's actually a subject I could talk about all day long, so I'm going to move on to the next question. Hopefully that's answered it for you. Someone has just asked, do you believe that we should abolish the use of frames because they're a bit of a PowerPoint memory? That's an interesting question, actually, but no, I don't think we should abolish the use of frames because they are the way of telling Prezi, what you want your audience to look at, what you want your audience to see, and of course, more importantly, when you want your audience to see it. So I don't think we should abolish frames at all, but I think what we should all try to abolish is the PowerPoint mindset, and that's something that I try to do a lot in my Prezi training, really get people to think outside of slides, and that's something that everyone struggles with, and I think that's why we see a lot of bad Prezis. But without frames, it would be really, really difficult for Prezi to know where you want to start your presentation, where you want to move to next and so on. So my answer is no to that. What are my feelings about music in a Prezi? This is a really, really great question from Evelyn, so thank you very much for that, Evelyn. I was actually talking about this yesterday to a group of brand new Prezi users. I think that Prezi is I think music in Prezi is a really, really important thing to consider. Now, if I was building a presentation that was for a live audience, so if I was standing up in front of a room full of people delivering a presentation or even doing online delivery like I'm doing right now, of course I wouldn't add music because that's just going to distract people. Now, with Prezi, hopefully most of you in the group know that it's very, very easy to share your presentations online, to embed them into web pages and things like that. And if that's the reason that you're building a Prezi, then I would say you have to put music into it, because people's attention spans, when they're working online and viewing anything, is really, really limited. If you add background music to your Prezi presentation, it will engage them a lot more, and also it will really help you set the scene of what it is you're talking about. So we had an example, I think it was last year, maybe even the year before, we created a Halloween Prezi that was used as a competition. So people had to take that template, that Halloween template, and use it to tell us what scared them the most about presenting. Now, we created that template with like a graveyard scene, and there was zombies walking through the graveyard and things like that. So it looked scary, but it didn't feel scary until we found some really quite eerie background music, and we dropped that in. It really didn't feel scary at all, but with that background music it completely changed everything. So maybe I'll try and dig that out in just a second and put the link to that in the chat box for you, but I think it's a really good question. My answer is, if you're building a Prezi for people to view online, absolutely always put background music in there. Another question is there an instruction manual for Prezi? Yes, there kind of is. If you go to the Prezi website and click on the Learn and Support page at the very top of the screen, you will see lots and lots of tutorial videos, lots of information about new features and what the existing features do and things like that. So it is a bit of an instruction manual. It doesn't tell you how to do things, step by step, but it is a very useful resource regardless. A little sales pitch here, of course. If you want to know how to do things step by step, we do offer some very good online Prezi training. So there you go, how to get that in. Another question, let's go through as many of these as we can. Let's get rid of that little message on the screen there. So, is there any new animation features being offered in Prezi? That was a question from Lorraine, and a really good one actually. Gets asked all the time whenever I'm delivering any kind of Prezi training. At the moment the answer is no. So hopefully most of you who are Prezi users right now will know that there is only one kind of animation in Prezi, and that is to slowly reveal things on your screen. And whilst that's really useful, I personally think that it would be very nice to have the option to actually get things to disappear as well. So I have heard talk of that from Prezi and a few people I know at Prezi. I don't know if it's going to be there soon, if it's going to be there at all, but I do know that there are thousands upon thousands of people that have been asking the same question. One thing I would definitely say is that we will never ever see the type of animation features you have in PowerPoint. So things like, titles flying in from the left and the right and spinning around, all that kind of stuff. That will never happen in Prezi, and if it does, then I will quit my job as a Prezi trainer straight away, because that would just make Prezi a really, really horrible looking presentation tool. So the answer is, I hope so, but I just don't know when, Lorraine. Another question is there an MP3 file size limit to what you can include? The answer is no to that. I don't think there's any limit on MP3 size, and in fact MP3s are always normally pretty small files. So in terms of what you can insert into Prezi, if we're working with video, for instance, you can insert videos up to 100 meg in file size and sometimes even more. So there's definitely not going to be a limit on MP3 file size, because most MP3s will be nowhere near that kind of file size that I mentioned there. Another question is, will there be a copy and paste feature in Prezi in the future? There is at the moment. There is a copy and paste feature in Prezi, but of course it only works for objects you have inside Prezi. So my guess is that what you probably mean is, can I grab something from, I don't know, a Word document or a web page, copy it there and then paste it straight in? The answer is no at the moment. That isn't possible, but I think in the future, and don't quote me on this, I think in the future it probably will be, because I'm pretty confident that Prezi at some stage will move across from being Flash-based to HTML5, and I'm no technical expert, but I think that will become a lot more possible with that kind of technology behind it. Let's have a look at some more questions. I may as well keep going and see how many we can get through. Hopefully you're finding this useful. Someone has said, can we provide examples of, oh, I've already answered that, how we can provide examples of zooming. So another question then, how can I make Prezi more popular in my organization? I think that says. Yeah, I think that says in my organization. The answer to that is to make some really good Prezis, to be honest with you. You're definitely not going to make Prezi popular at all in your organization if you create death by Prezi. So what I would do is actually, I don't know what your organization is or what types of presentations you build, but most of the time when we have people who are trying to get Prezi into their business, we would recommend to them that they take a really important PowerPoint presentation that has been built in the past. Maybe it was for a sales tender or a sales proposal, something that was really important to the business. Take something like that and try and turn it into a Prezi, and use the same steps that I've just been talking about in this presentation. Have a look at the slides and the content, mind map all of that information, think about what might be a really good big picture for that presentation, and then build it and turn it into a Prezi. A couple of other questions though then before we wrap things up, because we are running out of time. Do you use vector images for the background image? That's a really good question. For the benefit of everyone who doesn't know what a vector image is, a vector image is an image that's been created on a computer, and the benefit of that going into Prezi is that it will never pixelate. So a vector image can go into Prezi as either a PDF file or an SWF file, and it will never pixelate on the screen. So the answer to your question is, personally, myself, yes, I do. I normally use vector imagery for the backgrounds of all of my Prezis, and I find that very easy to do because I have a creative background. So I am, or I was originally, a graphic designer, and I know how to create vector imagery myself. So I do have a big advantage there. If you don't know how to do that, if you aren't a designer, and most of the people we train aren't, then there are places you can go to get your own vector imagery. So I would have a look at online image libraries like Shutterstock would be my first choice, or iStock Photo or Getty Images. any of those online image libraries will have a filter that you can use when you're searching for imagery, and in that filtering option you will see something that says vector. Okay, and that will give you illustrations that have been created on a computer. So I would use that for your background if you can. You don't have to, but I think if you can, yes, you remove the kind of pixelation from your presentation, and it does give you a bit more freedom. But I think it's also nice to use a combination of vector imagery and raster imagery, and real photographs as well. And if you take a look at our portfolio on our website, so if you go to thepresenter.com, have a look at our work page, you'll see quite a few Prezis on there that use a combination of both vector imagery and real photographs as well. So I'll just finish up with one final question. Let's have a look and see which would be the best one to answer. Let's see. Do you have any suggestions about copyright-free images or music sites that you can recommend? Yes, I do, absolutely. So copyright is something that you do need to be really, really conscious of. Obviously within Prezi there is a Google image search box, and in that search box there is actually a little drop down that you can click on. I'll show you it right here on my presentation just so you're absolutely clear where it is. If I go to Insert Image, so here's my search box on the right. Now there is a drop down here and a tick box that will remove copyrighted imagery from my search. So in other words, I'm not going to break any laws if I tick that box and then search for imagery and use any of the imagery that comes up. So make sure that you're definitely careful about that. The same rule applies to music as well. You definitely are not allowed to just grab an MP3 that you have, you know, from your iTunes library that's kind of a track that's in the charts right now, and then just use that in your presentation. Okay, because you do need to pay for the rights to do that. So the online image libraries I mentioned a second ago, so Shutterstock, iStock, Getty Images, any of those, I think all of them, I know for a fact Shutterstock definitely does have a library of music files as well. So on there you will find background music for all sorts of different you know, feelings and emotions and moods and kinds of things like that, and also sound effects. So if you want to add a bit of humor to your Prezi, you can add sound effects as well by going there. Of course you have to pay for all of those sound files, but if you want to make sure you avoid copyright, then it's definitely worth doing. It's definitely worth the investment. And you know, maybe some of you are musical who are in the audience. You might want to make your own music and drop that into Prezi. We have had one or two customers do that in the past by just using GarageBand or something like that on their Mac, which is quite a good thing to do. So yeah, be conscious of copyright. Be careful of it because it is really, really important thing to try and avoid. Okay, so I think I've answered nearly all of the questions that have come in. I will have a quick scan through those once we're done, and any questions that I didn't have time to answer I will tweet about, so keep the conversations going on there after this on @thepresenter and #Prezi Webinar, and I will also try and write a little blog post as well that just answers all of those questions, and you'll be able to find that on our website. Okay, so hopefully you have found that useful. Some of you, I think, attended our first round of Prezi webinars, which was all about why you should use Prezi. Obviously, we've been talking about why or how to avoid death by Prezi. If you want to join us for the next webinar, there we'll be talking a lot more about how to use the big picture technique. So I've talked about it quite a bit already today, but I'm going to go into a lot more detail about how you can come up with the big picture technique, where you can go to get the right imagery to use for it as well, and how you can use that to really good effect within your Prezi. And there's a lot more to it than what I've talked about today, so there could be some cases in your presentation when actually you can use a big picture within another big picture. You know, that might sound a little bit confusing right now, but there's lots of tricks you can use to really give people a kind of big light bulb moment at the end of your presentation and really help them grasp the information. So hopefully we'll see you there for that next one. That will be on March the 27th and the 31st as well at the same time. I really hope that you found this webinar useful. I've certainly enjoyed delivering it to you, and thanks very much for all of the questions that have come in. Feel free to email me as well, or email the team here. It's just info@thepresenter.com if you want to ask us anything directly, or maybe find out a little bit more about our Prezi training or design services. That's of course how we keep the light bulbs on here in the office, is by offering those kind of services. So do get in touch if you think that would be a help to you and your organization. But thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day or your evening, depending on what the time is there. And I'm going to keep the conversation going on Twitter as well for a little bit longer, so I hope I'll see some of you on there. So thank you very much, and I will see you for the next webinar. Take care.